boy Getsuga, and today I'll be doing a Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier analysis video on Scareclaws as well as Amazonas. So let's get started. Scareclaws, they're basically a new archetype in a new lore. I don't know what the lore is called. I just know it revolves around Vista Starfrost. And his archetype basically revolves around summoning their Link monster and OTKing your opponent with it. So let's get started. For the pros, this deck has great boss monsters, they have great spells and traps, and they are consistent. They can also swarm since all of them have an effect that allows them to just inherit summon themselves from the hand, basically allowing you to swarm the field, and this deck can OTK. This deck can also set up disruptions since they have a trap card that basically negates things, as well as a new trap, a new trap that basically is an Icarus attack, but if you control Vista Starfrost, it basically allows you to banish the monsters instead once it destroys them. Also, this deck has decent protection. In the form of some disruption. The only con that I can actually think of for this deck is that they generally cannot play through 3+ disruptions, and that's a very, very small con. Because this deck actually surprisingly can play through a fair amount of disruptions unless your opponent just flips up some floodgate, because if you don't know, the Link monsters are dark, and the main deck monsters are the Earth. I think Reichheart is also dark, but Reichheart is a warrior monster, and your Earth monsters are beast monsters, and your Link monsters are beast warriors. And I found that out the hard way when my opponent flipped Rivalry on me, and I was like, oh wait, these monsters are different. Like, I can't Link summon, I can't do anything because a lot of them are made up of different types. So keep that in mind. But besides that, they generally do not care about disruptions, and I found that out when I was facing off against I forgot. Sword Souls. I don't know why it took me so long for me to remember that. Yeah, I think I even recorded the duel and uploaded it to the channel. Anyways, they generally don't care too much about certain disruptions, and they can easily make follow-up plays, especially since this deck likes to snowball advantage in the form of your field spell as well as your Link monsters. Because the Link one basically adds a card, and then that card also adds a card, and you just go +2. As well as Try Hard, basically allows you to special summon from the graveyard and get a search, so that's also a +2 in itself. For power, I'd give this deck a 4 out of 5 because this deck is really strong, can OTK, and also does piercing if you control the right monsters. For defense, I give it a 3 out of 5. For recovery, a 3 out of 5. Versatility, a 2.5 out of 5. Because this deck, for the most part, is kind of a one-trick pony. It's not too predictable. And by that I mean it's not like it only has one trick up its sleeve, but his tricks aren't really all that impressive. And for consistency, I'd give this deck a 3.5 out of 5. Because the field spell is pretty searchable with Reichheart, as well as any of your main deck Scareclaw monsters. And apparently we were getting another Scareclaw main deck monster. So you could just link it off into your Link 1, and then basically just search your field spell, which also just nets you value. So that in itself is pretty good. The only thing that sucks is if you don't have the material to summon your Tryhard, you're kinda screwed, but also not really. Also not really for the reason that Like I mentioned, you have your in archetype Icarus attack, but at the same time, that's not really a foolproof defense. So overall, I'd give this deck a 2.5. It's a tier 2.5. So next up, we have Amazoness. And I did a video on Amazoness before, like, I think 2 years ago. Unless it was like, yeah, it was 2 years ago. Time flies by fast when you're going through a pandemic. Anyways, for the pros, oh yeah, this deck is now an official fusion deck since this deck got more fusion monsters. Anyways, for the pros, they have great monsters. I put monsters twice. Whoops. They have great monsters because now instead of the main deck monsters, the good main deck monsters just being princess and maybe queen, and I guess maybe spy and baby tiger. You also have that other one, I think battle commander. I forgot its name, but it basically allows you to set an Amazon and spell trap or polymerization directly from your deck onto the field. And it also special summons itself, so it's really nice. As well as I think they also got like new pendulum cards, which also allow you to do neat things. I personally don't like the pendulum cards, but I will admit they are pretty decent. As well as their boss monsters, with the exception of the tiger. The tiger line in this archetype is kind of ass. Not gonna lie, but Amazon is Empress as well as Kaiserin, pretty good. This deck has great spells and traps. Undeniable. Ambush, amazing. Call, amazing. New fusion spell, alright. Plus, I've been saying that this deck desperately needed their own name brand fusion spell, so that way they could fusion summon a lot easier. The only thing I really dislike about the fusion spell is you can't use both effects in the same turn, which is stupid. That is really dumb. I hate how you can't use them both in the same turn. because if it did, you'd actually be able to just fusion summon multiple monsters, which I feel is what fusion decks should be allowed to do. But it basically makes it harder for you to do that for some stupid reason. I hate this cold. I'm sorry, I hate this cold, possibly COVIDs. This deck is consistent. Now that you have triple call, you have triple princess. You also can just normal summon any Amazoness, and if you have that the new level 5 monster I was talking about, you can basically special summon her and then use her effect to set. I mean, you can't really activate call as soon as it's set, but you can set any of your other cards and basically combo off there. And this deck is fairly versatile because you have means of banishing your opponent's monsters via your trap. You can also attack multiple monsters. This deck can also do piercing damage. This deck can do a fair amount of things, despite being a battle-reliant deck. And the monsters in this deck can also float, as well as the traps. Like Empress, Empress, Ambush, they float. Kaiserin, not so much, which is kind of weird. I think it does float, but just not as hard as Empress. And this deck has decent protection. You can basically form soft locks. And if you've ever watched my Amazon is Duel video, my most recent one, you can tell it's not impervious, especially to things like Evenly Matched or Dark Ruler. You can basically just kind of lock your opponent using. Because I think I summoned Queen, Empress, and Kaiserin. And I think I did record that duel and post it. So you guys can watch that, if you want. It's not like I care or anything. Baka. Well, that was cringe. Anyways, moving on to the cons. This deck can barely play through 2+ disruptions, but what else can you expect from a deck that is very reliant on the battle phase? And this deck does lose to non-destruction removal because a lot of the floating requires your opponent to destroy your cards. And if your opponent knows what they do, or if your opponent actually reads cards, they're not gonna just walk into that. But I mean, it is Yu-Gi-Oh, so reading is probably not gonna be something that your opponent's gonna do. And not too many people. And one thing I do notice from playing these janky decks is not too many people know what these cards do, mainly because decks like these aren't on people's radars. So so it kind of allows me to be able to get away with doing certain things without my opponent realizing it. So who knows, like your opponent might actually pop your monsters and traps without reading them. But realistically speaking, you can't really count on that, so for power, to give this deck a 3 out of 5. For defense, a 3 out of 5. Recovery, a 3 out of 5. Versatility, a 2.5 out of 5. And for consistency, a 3 out of 5. Overall, this deck is a tier 3 deck. Despite the power creep, it's not as Amazonists aren't as bad as they were previously when I did a video on them. They're still terrible. Like, the new support doesn't really fix too many of their problems. Granted, they got this support back during the Link Frames era. I'd argue that this deck would probably be like tier 2.5. I guess prior to Nightmares and freaking Spiral Helix coming in. This deck could have been a real contender, because I remember like watching Goki players as well as like many other decks with Amazonists back in the day, which is wild. Anyways, tell me what you guys think about Scareclaws and Amazonists in the comment section below. And it's been me, your boy Blue Getsuga, and I'm out.